Surprise, bitches! There's 2 album reviews this week. Hello everybody! Yes, you heard that right. This is not a drill, this is the second album review in 2 days. What led me to do this? I wanted to. I felt like it, and I needed a palate cleanser after that horrific Bon Jovi album yesterday. So, we're doing Charli XCX, and we're gonna look into her new album, Brat. But, where are my manners? Welcome in to First Impressions. This is the show all about reviewing albums one day after they come out. I'm your host, Gavin, and of course we're lying about the title today, but when are we not lying about the title? I mean, this series never comes out the day after an album comes out. Why? I'm lazy. Anyways, I wanted to do this just because there's a lot of good music this week, and it seemed like a shame to not review a good album this week. So after that horrific Bon Jovi album, here we are. Okay, today we have Charli XCX's new album, Brat. Came out a couple days ago, and it's kind of fire, I'm not gonna lie. Charli XCX is, of course, one of the big pop stars right about now. Most people have heard her name. In the past, Charli's been really good at writing some hits, writing some stuff that charted. Her albums have done pretty well on the charts. They do a lot better in the UK, reaching #1, reaching the top 10, doing all that stuff over there. She is from the UK, and the British audience is clearly what she's gunning for in her music. But I've never been a huge fan of her work. I've thought it was just kind of average. But I think that this album is a new course for Charli going forward. She's never really broken too high on the Billboard charts and things like that in the past in the US, while she's done very well in the UK. So I seem to think that this could be her path to getting those #1, #2 as albums. If Billie Eilish and Taylor Swift are still up there in 1 and 2 this week, then she'll have no chance, but I think she has a very decent chance to reach the #3 spot this week. But Brat is her 6th album. Technically, you could call it her 8th. She has 2 albums that are more considered as mixtapes. Personally, I think they're same enough to call them the same thing, so I would call this her 8th album, but a lot of people disagree with me, and I can see it if you want to call it that. So 6th or 8th, technically, whatever you want to call it. The first thing interesting about this album was, of course, the cover being exceedingly minimalistic. What's also interesting is she went back and changed her old album covers on the digital versions on Spotify and streaming services and things like that to match this style and be in just 2-color text. In an interview, she did talk about how she did this because she noticed that nearly every single best-selling album of all time, when it's a solo female artist, there seems to be a requirement that their face or body or something is on the album, and so she wanted to make a point and just kind of show some spunk, some going against the rules, some breaking that norm. And honestly, I respect that. At first, when I first saw this album, I was going to bash it, actually, for not hiring an actual artist or an actual photographer to get an actual photo shoot going for this album, but after knowing that story, I understand why she did it, and she is just trying to spread awareness about that kind of unfair expectation, and so I respect that a lot more. What I will bash right off the bat, however, the capitalization on this album sucks. What she did is she only capitalized the first word of every song, or the first letter of every song. Every other word does not start with a capital letter. And so it's this very odd-looking stylistic choice, which I don't really like at all. But, of course, I'm not here to judge capitalization, I'm here to judge music. Speaking of music, there is some very interesting stuff going on with the production on this album, in the fact that there are so many different producers working on different songs. A.G. Cook produced nearly every song on this album, so he was clearly the executive kind of overseer. But there are some other names thrown in on nearly every song. There are people like Hudson Mohawk, there's people that have done all sorts of crazy projects, people that have worked with Daft Punk, people that have worked with Max Martin, people that have worked with Kanye West. So clearly, by getting this all-star lineup of producers, she was looking for a very specific sound and was trying to wrangle something down. Did it pay off? I think it really did. I think that the production is really interesting on this album and pays off to a large degree. But let's get into the track list and break this down track by track. This album opens with the track 360. I gave it a middle 8. This song kind of slaps. It has a very pulled back instrumental, which can be a bit difficult to get used to. It's a very not a full sound. which is very different than later tracks on this album. And the synths are kind of dry, and there's a drum machine there, but I think it kind of holds its own, as there's just this really nice flow that is really fire and kind of gives you an idea of what's coming without giving too much away immediately. You kind of save those big guns for later in the album, and I respect that, which is why I gave it such a high grade. The lyrics are also pretty interesting. There's references to all sorts of real-life people, such as Julia Fox, and also Charli XCX's recently deceased friend, Sophia Zion, who was a avant-garde sort of artist who died, I think, in 2021, about 3 years ago, tragically in an accident. She also makes some interesting references and allusions to her previous albums, which is something that she really likes to do, especially later in the track. I didn't catch all of them because I'm no super fan of hers, but there are some interesting allusions to previous albums on here. There's also some interesting metaphors on here and uses of imagery, but it was very interesting. There was a very refreshing wordplay here, which I really liked. It's also well connected together. The only thing is, it doesn't really move in the sense that the riffs don't really develop as the song goes on, in that there's not very clear sections, I guess, and not that you need sections, but you kind of want to see the development of the ideas presented in the song, and you don't really see that, which that does kind of have the problem of leaving it a little stale at the end, but ultimately it is only a 2-minute song, so that was not nearly as big of a problem as it could have been. Club Classics I gave a high 7. This track carries over a lot of stuff from the previous track. Like, for instance, the idea of it being very driving, very forward, very punchy. It interestingly does a little bit of a genre shift, kind of going more towards the club area rather than the electropop in the first track. And that's an interesting take because Charli is more known for that electropop sort of thing, so to have it open with that and then shift into something a little more gritty, a little more house, a little bit more like techno adjacent sort of thing. And it's pulled off pretty well. I mean, Charli's first gigs when she was getting started were doing things at clubs, things at raves, that sort of idea. And so I think this is a really nice callback to her beginnings, and a clear use that she was very good at what she did when she did that club thing, as this music is great. There's a lot more fast wordplay here with more direct references to people that Charli knows, which is very interesting to see. And it's a nice piece of work, don't get me wrong, it just didn't do it for me as much as 360. Sympathy is a Knife got a middle 7 from me. The drive and the power just keep on going as we enter this next track, and it works really well here. The lyrics kind of shift tonality here from a more meta and reference-y filled sort of music into something a little bit more personal, a little bit more focused on introspection with Charli. And I think that's a welcome shift to keep it more interesting, make sure that you've got some variation in there. The drum machine is also decently interesting there, it's playing a nice little part there. But I will admit the synth loop gets old pretty quick. I found it to be a little bit too earwormy, a little bit too annoying, and so I was not a massive fan of the instrumentation on this one, hence its lower score. But it was a nice shift in the album, and not bad by any means. Track number 4 was called I Might Say Something Stupid, and this one unfortunately took a bit of a dip. I gave it a high 6. I'm really conflicted on this track. On one hand, it's a well-written switch-up on an album that kind of needed a switch-up at this point, being a little bit repetitive as far as soundscapes go at this point. But on the other hand, the overly auto-tuned singing just doesn't come across as taking itself seriously very much on here. Well, that's not even quite true. The problem is it takes itself seriously, but I can't. It just comes across as corny and a very strange creative choice that I didn't really like. It's just not used very tastefully, is the way I would put it. I have no problem with auto-tune, but when it is used in this way to the point that it's just over the top, but not in a way that it feels like it's trying to be meta, it's just an odd creative choice. I don't really like it. It just feels awkward. It throws off me listening to this, and I didn't quite like that at all. It's just kind of wonky and didn't really click. But however, it is an interesting switch up on the album, and an interesting kind of slow down 3 tracks in, which I thought the album could use. So for that reason, I did bump it up quite a bit. However, as a standalone, it kind of slips down a bit, but it is a 6 because it's on this album specifically in the placement that it is. And there's some nice production at the end of the day. It's not a bad track, it just has that one marring decision on it. Track number 5, Talk Talk, I like quite a bit more. I give it a high 7. Talk Talk redirects a little bit after the mellow sort of interlude feeling on the previous track, and it's still in that dance EDM sort of region, but it's a very different style here, and I liked it a lot. There's a more of a punch in the lyrics, and there's more of a punch in the instrumentation specifically, and it switches up its soundscape for a refreshing experience on this album. Von Dutch is a great track.
I had a goddamn plan!
It was one of the singles that was released, I think it was released a couple months ago, it's been out for a while, but Von Dutch is a fantastic track. I gave it a middle 9. It's very strong. It's an absolutely banging dance track with a lot of flow, excellent production, really nice lyricism, and honestly just a lot of power. The synth hooks are really fresh and interesting, and I really just found it a joy to listen to. And the melodies serve the song super well. There is something to be said about the melody being very well crafted to serve the specific instrumentals that they had come up with. And the lyrics are very sassy. It has this idea of sort of living a lavish life, but not really caring what other people think about what you do, which the messaging can get a bit silly if you're not careful, but I think she does it in a nice way here. The messaging doesn't come across as too over the top or distasteful or anything like that. And I can really feel the energy on this one, and it is a certified bop. Everything is romantic, however. The next track was even better. I give this one a high 9. This one was teetering on the edge of perfection. This one is just a huge switch up in style. It has a hyperspeed rap over an orchestra, which was really interesting, with these kind of clashing rhythms and meters. It's not in a way that it feels off or anything. It kind of just feels like it kind of feels like it's kind of, I don't even know if this is right, but like a kind of adjacent to beat poetry sort of thing, in the way that the rhythm is very off-kilter, very purposeful, but still wonky. And this orchestra section is just very beautiful, very well put together, doesn't feel cheap or corny at all. But when the beat kicks in, it turns into a fantastic dance track. Again, its switch up it's not clumsy at all, it's handled beautifully. There's an absolute arsenal of strong producers that worked on this track. I think I counted 5, maybe even 6, and these people all just really brought their all. This track is really well put together with a really nice vision. Sometimes when you get 5 producers, you can get a lot of contrasting vision, but it's clear they all really just wanted to see the song succeed and came together to make this beautiful project. And this song just has really cool flow. I loved this thing. As we reach the halfway track, we reach Rewind, which I gave a low 7. This track's alright. I will say there's not much that jumps out at me here, and I ultimately think it's not because it's a bad track. I think it's just outshined by other tracks on the album. The lyrics are a bit basic, and the instrumentals aren't awe-inspiring by any means. However, it's still just really nicely produced and nicely put together. And I struggle to come up with anything bad to say about this track. There's just a couple aspects that are mediocre, but that strong production brings it up, so ultimately a little underwhelming, but not bad. It is a good song. Track number 9 is the only track to feature a capital letter that is not in the first word on this album, so Charli gets the Grammar Award for this one. Congratulations. This one got a middle 8. It is similar to track 4, which I didn't like, of course, but it's like track 4 if it worked. The lyrics are a tad better than on that track, which certainly helps, and the auto-tune is still present to a degree, but it's not nearly as obnoxious as it was on that earlier track. As that corny auto-tune really held, I might say something stupid back in a major way, and so the more tasteful use of auto-tune and pitch correction was much more welcome here. The lyrics are really personal and anecdotal in nature, which was a nice change of pace here. The keys riff is also very catchy, and it doesn't get old or dry at any point. Really my only complaint is that last 30 seconds being a little over the top. Track number 10 is Girl So Confusing, which I didn't really enjoy. I gave it a low 4. Unfortunately, it just comes across as a bit of a dud on this album. The lyrics just have this really rambly sort of quality to them, and it just isn't very engaging to me, except the chorus. The chorus is interesting. It's no masterpiece, but the chorus has some interesting lyricism that kind of breaks up that rambly feeling on the verses, which I didn't like. And the choruses bring up an interesting premise and an interesting, thought-provoking sort of idea, but the verses really fail to match this. The synth sounds are also just obnoxious to me, and ultimately this seems like a minor misstep in a otherwise pretty great album. So unfortunately a lot of albums do have that one track that just doesn't hold a candle, and this is that track. I did notice this is the only song on the album with only one credited producer, and so my speculation is that that kind of lack of varied opinions in the booth might have led to a lackluster finished product, That is completely speculation, but that is my idea of why this one might not have been so good. Apple is a high 6. It's an alright track, but it kind of falls into the same trap that Rewind did, which is that there's not any specific aspect of the song that makes it super memorable. It's just kind of there. It's well put together, it's compelling, it's all these great things, but ultimately there's not a ton of uniqueness that I can glean from it, and it doesn't really crack that upper level of greatness. Track 12 is called B2B. I gave it a middle 9. We are back up to that gold standard. This is another song that's almost like techno adjacent. It really leans into these house influences, and it's a nice twist on the songs that we've heard thus far. It's just pretty good until it reaches the halfway beat switch in the middle, which gives it that extra edge over the others, you know? The synth basses sound really cool, and there's this really nice, distinct amount of sections on this track, and the sections don't feel separated at all. They flow into each other super nicely, and just keeps you guessing at every turn. Ultimately, this is a track that is above and beyond the others, and is really hitting that upper bar that we think Charli has been able to hit, and is really showing it here. I just really enjoyed this track. It's very compelling. Mean Girls. No, not the movie. Don't watch that movie. Low 9. This song really cooks. The lyrics are specific, but widespread enough to the point where anyone can really look at the subject matter of this song and sort of see something that they relate to, which is really nice in the fact that you can get that specific, but also brush with a broad brush. Doesn't that phrase have a negative connotation? I don't know, but you know what I'm trying to say. And it's really driving in a new way, with this super refreshing soundscape and interesting production and just great choices all around. The piano part on this track, for instance, is very interesting. It sounds like something that would come out of an Undertale game. That piano part is really nice to me. Ultimately, this song really reminded me of Death by Glamour from Undertale, actually, which is not a bad thing by any means. That song is phenomenal, of course. There's a lot of similarities here, though, to Toby Fox's work, and so that was pretty fun for me, being a fan of his games, to see that. This song just really sticks out as its own thing and comes together very nicely into a very nice track. I think about it all the time. I gave it a middle 8. This song switches things up again in being both stylistically different and lyrically different, being probably the most introspective song on this album. It's very self-examinatory, very compelling in that way. The synth lines are just very cool, and it's a very nice soundscape too. It's super personal and a nice change-up, and all in all, a very strong entry into this album. And we end with the track 365, which I gave a low 8. I liked it. This song serves as a sort of bookend, being a sped-up remix of 360, the opening track, with different lyrics. The ending synth lines are just very intriguing. I had a lot of fun guessing what would come next in each section of the song. The song kind of takes you through the different styles heard throughout the album, and was very interestingly put together, with all those styles kind of being cohesive as they dash from point to point, not really giving you any time to really dig into that section, as it bounces around, keeps your attention going, keeps you guessing. It's very interesting. And all in all, it's a very nice conclusion to this album. I recognize that earlier today, she did release the deluxe edition, which has 3 extra songs, but I don't really review deluxe editions, so we are going to skip those for now. So let's get into the best and worst track. The best track, I think, was Everything Is Romantic. That just had some really interesting change-ups, a very compelling intro, which changed things up, tried new things, combined different types of music, combined orchestral with rap, with this sort of sample-y feeling, with, of course, dance and EDM, and it really succeeded to just go that extra mile, break boundaries between genres, and just crunch that extra level, and so hence why I gave it a high 9 earlier. That song is fantastic. The worst track is Girl So Confusing, as it just doesn't reach that upper bar. The lyrics are rambly, except for the choruses, and it just doesn't really hit, and is the dud on this album. To wrap up, this album is just a lot of fun. I haven't had this much fun guessing what was next on an album in a while. Leaning full force into that EDM sort of sound has proven to be the right choice, as this is phenomenally done. And you know it's a good sign when, aside from one dull track, I gave everything a 6 or higher. That is a really good sign coming from me. And it really just says something about how consistent this album is, which is something that can't be said about many albums. But this one is just very consistent, and that's hard to pull off. A lot of the tracks kind of struggle to reach that upper barrier, you know, where it's the difference between a great track and a superb track. A lot of them kind of fall short right at that line. But there are a couple notable songs that really do break that barrier. And ultimately, although there's not an immense amount of superb songs, I thought that there are more than enough great songs to make this album very, very memorable. There's also a very wide range of not just emotions explored, but also styles and different, like, soundscapes and different interesting flows and different aspects of these songs that is quite different and engaging, and you don't always see that much variation on an album, but you do see it here. As it's not just one style of EDM, but it kind of bounces around. It kind of gets adjacent to techno, it kind of gets adjacent to club, it kind of gets adjacent to a lot of things. And ultimately, although quite a few tracks struggle to break the ceiling, there are a lot of tracks here which brush against the ceiling. And it's just a testament, again, to that really strong consistency, which, like I said, is hard to pull off. This is also just a very well overseen project, as a lot of times when you bring in a bunch of different producers, you can end up with this kind of clashy lack of vision on the album where the tracks don't fit together. But here, there is great oversight, and everything kind of comes together like puzzle pieces. I think part of that is due to Charli's knowledge, this being her 6th album. She's been around the block a couple times. I think another part of that goes to the main producer, A.G. Cook, who should really be credited for the strong vision and the strong choices made while allowing the guest producers to do their thing and show their own stripes. And this album just keeps it really clear and really fresh, and it is, in my opinion, Charli's best work to date, by a landslide. And added on to her recent success of being a feature on the Barbie movie soundtrack, this album, combined with that, really has a good chance to put her finally on that complete top spotlight spot on the US charts. While of course she's been a known star in the US for a while now, she hasn't quite broken into that superstardom like we've seen in the UK from her. And I think that these recent successes really have the potential to push her into that upper echelon of superstars. This was a really strong album. I really liked it a lot. It's not the type of thing I normally listen to, but there are a couple tracks that I will be adding to my playlist. Therefore, I am feeling a low 9 on this thing. And that's going to do it. This is In Contention for Album of the Year for me. So, I just want to thank you guys. Thanks for stopping by, checking out this second album review of the week. Don't expect me to ever do it again, as I am pushing out this video in about 12 hours from turnaround time, which is not how I like to roll. I like to be a little bit more lazy than that. Anyways, next week is Meghan Trainor. I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.